into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Lord, there's nothing. Nothing is better than you. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who coming on the clouds. He's coming on the clouds. Kings and kingdoms will bow down. And every chain will break. As broken hearts declare His praise. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. And every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. Open up the gates, make way before the King of Kings. The God who comes to save is here to set the captives free. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. And every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. And every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Oh, every knee will bow before Him. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can stop the Lord Almighty?
Good morning. It's great to see you all here today. Welcome to Terra Forma Church. My name is Jill. You usually know me as the announcement person, so I'm just going to get right to it. We have a lot of things happening in April. First of all, this coming Friday, we're going to have our Good Friday worship night. We have these worship nights regularly. If any of you have been there, they're really awesome. We do them in South Riding at the Long's house. It's usually around 7 p.m. So put that on your calendar for Friday night. I think it's a great way to kick off the Easter weekend, which of course on Sunday is Easter Sunday. So we'll be here. Make sure you invite a friend, family members, and we'll have a really wonderful service here together. And then right after that, the very next Sunday, after Easter Sunday, we're going to have a family kickball event right after church right here. So make sure you put that on your calendar. I think it'll be a good time, fun to kick off spring. We need some warm weather and some good times. So it's great to see you all here this morning. I hope you enjoy.
Good morning. Is it safe to come out yet? Good morning. Those who don't know me, I'm John Stanley. I'm your treasurer. Got up here about 6 months ago. We started the year. I wanted to give you a mid-year review. So I've got about 40, 50 slides, a bunch of spreadsheets. We're going to have a good time. Going to go through all the details. But actually what I wanted to do is want to catch you up on a couple of things, where we are with the financial picture. It's not great, but it's not horrible either. We've had some struggles, I think, as a community and a country and a world. Things have changed dramatically in the last 6 to 12 months, and I think we're all feeling it, and I think the church is feeling it. But you've got a good team of people leading the financial picture, and we've seen it coming, and we've made some important moves to help us. So. What I wanted to show you here is your first couple of quarters actual numbers, a little bit behind where we want to be. This quarter 3 we're in now, it's going to be another struggle. But the changes that we've implemented are going to kick in with the Q4. And you see we've get back into the green, or in this case the black. We're still going to be down for the year, but it's not a whole lot. And those of you that are taking financial peace with us, you know we've got a emergency plan. And we don't plan to dip into that, but we've got it if we need it. So it's a lot to take in. I'm here after service. My email is going to come up on there. If you have any questions, ever want to talk about this stuff, please reach out to me. Next one. So we started the year with some goals, and we've made progress on them. First goal was to really help out with the staff. I think we talked back then, we hadn't done anything with our staff with any bonuses or salary increases in almost 3 years. And we were able to do that in first quarter. We were able to give our staff a really nice, healthy bonus, and I think they're really very grateful for that and your generosity that made that happen. We have a goal of restarting the Kingdom Fund funding, which is different than putting out, because we still go into our Kingdom Fund every quarter and help out the community. But we haven't started the reinvesting yet, so that's still on the horizon. May or may not get there this year, so that might carry over. Increase in our investment in the internal ministries. A lot of that stuff we've got plans for, remain on hold until the financial picture gets better. And then we continue to push down costs, and that's been a priority and something that we're working really, really hard on. A couple things like we're doing, consolidating technology. Right now we've got a website, and then we've got some other things to manage different parts of gatherings and things of that. We're consolidating that down and reducing costs. We'll continue to do that. There's still a couple more places we can go. Next slide. And lastly, what I want to talk about is, and you may have noticed, our slides have changed. The beginning of the year, we had a very, very lofty goal of getting the church near a $500,000 budget. That was aggressive and really did not take into account the changes in the economy and the world in general. So as an elder group and our trustees, we looked at that and we reset our goals. And we wanted to reflect that in our weekly updates. And I wanted to make it a little bit more readable because you don't have to do the mathematics. Prior slide, we were telling you what the goal was for the year and the quarter. And if you did some kind of math, you could figure out if we were online or not. What we're going to show you going forward here is year to date and quarter to date. So if you look at all the weeks that lead up to the year, that's where we should be from a financial perspective and what we actually have. Both of those will grow as we go through the quarter. The year will continue to grow throughout the year. The quarter will reset each quarter. All right, so I just want to make you aware of that. And so we're looking at here real numbers, third quarter, first week. That's where we were. And you'll see that fluctuate from week to week is because we've got people that give weekly, we give monthly, bi-monthly. As that goes, it kind of evens out throughout the quarter. So, thanks.
There's this beautiful poem. It's in the book of Isaiah.
The city of Jerusalem has just been destroyed by Babylon, a great kingdom in the north. And all of these Jewish people, they've been sent away into exile, but a few remained in the city. And they're left wondering, what just happened? Has our God abandoned us?
Right, because Jerusalem was supposed to be the city where God would reign over the world to bring peace and blessing to everyone.
Now, Isaiah had been saying that Jerusalem's destruction was a mess of Israel's own making. They had turned away from their God, become corrupt, and so their city and their temple were destroyed.
Yeah, everything seems lost.
But the poem goes on. There's a watchman on the city walls. And far out on the hills, we see a messenger, and he's running towards the city. He's running and he's shouting, "Good news!" And Isaiah says, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news."
Beautiful feet?
Yes, the feet are beautiful because they're carrying a beautiful message.
What's the message?
That despite Jerusalem's destruction, Israel's God still reigns as king, and that God himself is going to one day return to this city, take up his throne, and bring peace.
And the watchmen sing for joy because of the good news that their God still reigns.
Now, in the New Testament, we find this same phrase, the good news. It's the Greek word euangelion, and it's also sometimes translated with the word gospel.
Yeah, so when Christians say, "Do you believe the gospel?" they mean, do you believe the news?
But not just any news. In the Bible, this phrase is always about the announcement of the reign of a new king. And in the New Testament, the Gospels use this phrase to summarize all of Jesus' teachings. They say that he went about proclaiming the good news of God's kingdom.
So Jesus saw himself as the messenger, bringing the news that God reigns.
Yes, but the way that he described God's reign, it surprised everybody. I mean, think, a powerful, successful kingdom. It needs to be strong, able to impose its will, able to defeat its enemies. But Jesus said the greatest person in God's kingdom was the weakest, the one who loves and who serves the poor. And he said that you live under God's reign when you respond to evil by loving your enemies and forgiving them and seeking peace. This is an upside-down kingdom.
Now, Jesus also said that this kingdom was arriving with him.
Yeah, so for example, there's this really interesting story where there's a high-ranking Roman officer, and he comes to Jesus begging him to heal his servant. And he even calls Jesus his Lord, acknowledging that Jesus is his authority. Jesus praises this man for recognizing what no one else yet had, that not only was Jesus announcing God's kingdom, he was the king.
And so the word gets out that this Jewish man from Galilee is talking and acting like he's the king of Israel. He's appointing 12 disciples, which are an image of Israel's 12 tribes. He's healing people, forgiving people their sins.
And all of this so threatened Israel's leaders that they finally decide to have him killed. And Jesus let them.
Yeah, which is a weird thing to do if you're trying to become king.
That's right. But for Jesus, this is what had to happen. Jesus saw the sin and the devastation of his people Israel as just one small part of the entire human condition. How all humanity has rebelled against God, resulting in the tragedy and devastation of our whole world. So how is God going to bring his reign over such a world? Jesus believed it would be through an act of sacrificial love for his enemies. This is why in the Gospels, Jesus' crucifixion is depicted as his enthronement as the King of the Jews.
Yeah, he receives a crown. He also receives a robe.
He's exalted up, not onto a throne, but onto the cross.
How beautiful are the feet that bring good news.
And the good news now is that Jesus has defeated death and that he reigns as king, that he's dealt with our sin and corruption himself and that he's conquered it with his life and with his love.
And then Jesus sends his followers to go out and keep announcing this good news of the upside-down kingdom.
And to invite everyone to give their allegiance to him, the king who defeated death with his love.
Good morning, Terraforma. Hey, we are in week 2 of a series we're calling He Is Not Here. And it's this idea that when these women came to the empty tomb, now, this is very rational. It made total sense. Sometimes I think we tell ourselves a story that this resurrection of Jesus was this message that came to kind of pre-scientific, superstitious people. And if we were there as these rational, enlightened thinkers as we are, we would know this is a magic trick and it's not to be trusted. And yet, when you read the gospel accounts, when you read these accounts that are in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, you realize that their reactions made total sense. They were thinking like rational people who are engaging with the truth of this just like you would. They figured, like all of us would have figured, that the death of Jesus was the end of the Jesus movement, and they were showing up at the tomb to venerate a rabbi that they loved and respected, but now was gone. And yet there's this angel, this angelic presence, and he's clothed in lightning, and he sits on this stone that's been rolled away, and he says, "You came seeking Jesus of Nazareth, but he is not here, for he's risen." And that reality, it changes the course of human history. We are still here talking about it today, not because it's a fairy tale or folklore, because it has symbolic, parabolic truth for us, but the truth, the claims of the Christian message rest not on a holy book or, some sacred place or some holy person, but on the reality of the resurrection of Jesus. It's an event that people witnessed, an event that even in the time of the Apostle Paul, which is in the same generation, he actually says, hey, there are people alive today that knew this. Go find them and ask them. It's almost like this would be the easiest thing in the world to disprove if you wanted to disprove it, and yet empires have risen and fallen. Movements have come about and then faded away, and yet still here we are, appreciating the reality of the resurrection of Jesus. And that's what I want to lean into today, is this idea, still all of us, sometimes we go looking for Jesus where we're not going to find him. Sometimes our expectations tell us we should look here or there, and he's not there. He's somewhere else entirely. And last week we talked about this idea that if you're searching for Jesus in the claims of empty religion, you're not going to find him there. And today, Palm Sunday is the day where we celebrate the arrival of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem. And our friends at the Bible Project did that really incredible 5-minute explanation. I was going to walk you through the entirety of the kingdom of God and how that would have landed to first century audiences, but my animation skills are not as good as theirs. So I thought, why don't we let them do that? And I think it really caught us up. And it begs this question of what is the relationship between Jesus and empire? And I'm going to say up front, this is a Sunday where every pastor in the country, because we're going to read the words of Jesus and we're going to read the the text of Scripture gets emails afterwards because we're patriotic and we love our country and this is good. And for those of us who call this country home, we have appreciated for a very long time a secure sense of empire. And yet we have to wrestle through this. Sometimes our patriotism and sometimes our faith are going to collide. And please hear me, please, before you write the email, this is not a political message. I actually am the most apolitical person you'll ever meet in the whole world. If you think you know how I vote, you probably don't, because it's a mystery to me even. And I'm not saying anything that indicts this or that. What I'm looking for is, how do we find the voice of King Jesus? And what does it look like for us to put our Jesus lens, our kingdom lens, ahead of our political lens? And then and only then do we interact with, how does this work here in this sphere? And I want to draw your attention to this reality, because anything else I say this morning, I want you to make sure you didn't miss this. Did you see the moment where the centurion came and bowed before Jesus? Because we have people here in this house, and maybe you work in different levels of the government. We have people here from the Department of Defense. Maybe you're in law enforcement. We have people here who are, things you can't talk about, and you say things like, I work for the State Department, and we all know what that means, but don't tell anyone. And people wrestle with this whole, okay, what is the relationship now between my faith and my allegiance to a country that is a good place to live, and this is a good thing, and God has a plan for our country. That's all good stuff. What does this look like? How does King Jesus collide with our ideas of empire? And I just got to hear me on this. He's coming in to Jerusalem, and he's riding on a donkey. And in some ways, he's leaning into their expectations of what a Messiah should be, or what they imagined a Messiah to be. And once a year, we all sing songs and we say, Hosanna, Hosanna, and we wonder what that means. And if you grew up in church, like I grew up in church, and we used to actually on this Sunday, wave palm fronds around. No one really knew why, but we were just doing it because it seemed biblical. And, we're going to fan each other with these big plants from Florida. And I had the task one time when I lived in Florida to go cut a bunch of palm fronds off of a palm tree so we could use them in the church service. And in the process of doing that, I was up on about a 20-foot ladder, and I cut the first palm frond, and a whole nest of rats was made up in the top of this palm tree. And then I had to realize, my choices are either I fight these rats, eyeball to eyeball, hand-to-hand combat, 20 feet off the ground, or I jump. I jumped. I didn't get hurt because I was still bendy back then. But if it happened today, I would be on crutches because I can't sit in a chair without armrests without needing to have a chiropractic adjustment later in the week. So that's how old I am, and it's none of your business. That's not funny. Oh, you're acting like you're not old and busted? Okay. You should go home and talk to the Lord about that. I'm making fun of the pastor. Anyway. They have a set of expectations. He's coming in. And listen, what Jesus is doing is kind of leaning into this just enough. Okay, and I want to kind of paint this picture for you. They believed that Messiah meant a certain thing. And Jesus had a completely different version of what it meant to be a Messiah. That word means the anointed one, the delivering king. Their archetype was some blend of, first you have Moses. So Moses as the deliverer, Moses as the one who called down the 10 plagues and liberated them from Egyptian captivity, the one who led them through the desert wanderings into the promised land in God's miraculous power. He was the God that went to war against their oppressors on their behalf. And so at Passover time, the current of their culture is electric with messianic expectation. They are wondering now. It is no longer Egypt, and it isn't even after Egypt came Assyria, and after Assyria came Babylon, after Babylon came Persia, and after Persia came Greece. Now it is not even any of those oppressors. Now it's Rome. Rome. And the prophets and those in the religious leadership of the day would call Rome the new Babylon. They're looking at this empire as everything that is antithetical to the claim of their God. They're supposed to be God's anointed people, blessed to be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. That in some way, God's plan for the world, for all nations, is going to flow through Israel. And they have this idea of Moses as the figurehead of that. The next iteration of this is this king named David, and God made a covenant with David. He expanded this idea in Moses. They would be priests, a nation of priests, that God would flow his blessing into the world through them, to this idea of David's eternal throne. And David is unique because he was unmatched on the battlefield. He was the greatest tactician in Israel's history. Matter of fact, when he lived 1,000 years before Jesus, he managed, despite the fact of being under-equipped and lacking any sort of cavalry and even the metallurgy to make advanced weapons, they subdued their neighbors and they established themselves on the stage of history in the ancient Near East as like a superpower in the region. Wow! So here again, they're looking for David. Moses and David, the miraculous power of God and this delivering warrior king. And so when he comes into Jerusalem, not on a war horse, but on a donkey. He doesn't fly in on Air Force One with a complement of fighter jets. He comes in like maybe in, I don't know, a Buick or a Volvo. Humble, meek, and mild. And they're trying to reconcile these two ideas. They're trying to reconcile this idea that, yes, we are oppressed. We need a warrior king. We need a deliverer. And Jesus is coming and he's saying, I am coming, yes, as a warrior, as a king, but not in the way that you think. And he's going to completely upend their expectations. The third kind of paradigm in this idea of what it means to be the Messiah, I think, is this idea of Elijah the prophet. Elijah the prophet, who calls people back to the way of Yahweh, the one true God, who confronts the idolatry and the syncretism and this kind of cultural evil. And this is the same guy who calls down lightning bolts on his opponents, and just obliterates them. And so as you begin to wonder where the disciples are in this mess, they get called into service of a new rabbi with Samika, whose name is Jesus, from this little town called Nazareth. And he travels around the region of Galilee, and he is opening the eyes of the blind, and he is bringing justice to the marginalized, and he is healing and restoring. He calls 12 disciples. He's playing into this paradigm of Messiah. And right before Jesus, there's this period of time where many people claimed that title. The most successful were all from the same family called the Maccabees, and these people led like guerrilla warfare campaigns against the Greeks at that point, with some success. At some point they actually overthrew the Greeks, and they actually achieved this moment of like respite from the oppression. But now the Roman war machine is on the stage. The empire has come, and so what does the relationship look like between those who say, Jesus is my king, and I'm walking in the way of King Jesus, or even before Jesus, you get this point of like, I'm God's chosen person. I'm someone who is elect by the Spirit of God to be the conduit for his blessing and plan into this world. I am a child of Israel, and David is my king. This is the stuff. This is the tension that Jesus enters into. And this is where he's going on Palm Sunday. When he was leading in these years of popularity up in Galilee, and he's doing these things he does. He's doing the Jesus thing, right? He's gathering crowds of people to him, and he's a rabbi with Samika, with authority, and he has a yoke that is easy and a burden that is light. And people are attracted to this. They're compelled by it, and they're gathering around him. Now, if Jesus was your pastor, when he began to turn towards Jerusalem, you would have fired him. Because he grew the movement to thousands of people, and then it was almost like when he started going towards Jerusalem, he was determined to chase them all away. He started saying things that were increasingly offensive. And we don't talk about that a lot in church because we want you to kind of stay. Seriously. It's like, Jesus is like controversial. And his disciples start looking at each other like, should we like mute his microphone? Like, can he say that? Like, what is he doing? And they begin to wonder, because what happens is their idea of Messiah and Jesus' idea of Messiah are beginning to collide more and more. And so I'm going to zoom in on one moment, okay? But Jesus has turned his attention away from Galilee. Now, they've watched him control the weather. They've watched him, have spiritual authority over demonic powers. They've watched him heal and perform all these miraculous signs. They have in their mind some kind of miraculous warrior that fits these archetypes of Elijah, who can call down lightning from heaven, and David, the warrior king, and Moses, the deliverer. And they have all of this in their mind when they say, Messiah. You're going to come overthrow Rome. You're going to come and be violent and powerful. The most famous of the Maccabees that claimed the title of anointed one before Jesus, his name was Judas Maccabee, and he had the nickname the Hammer. What a nickname. I've asked my wife to call me that exclusively from now on. It hasn't worked. She laughed. And I cried. Here we go. Jesus turning his attention toward Jerusalem. He's on his way, and they know. The disciples know. As a matter of fact, he tells them clearly. And this is so funny because in hindsight, you read this and go, how did they not know? I mean, 3 different times Jesus tells them, I'm going to Jerusalem. When I get there, I'm going to be arrested, I'm going to be tortured, I'm going to be killed. 3 times he tells them that. And you wonder why they were shocked when it happened, right? I mean, 3 different times he's like, guys, come here. We're going to Jerusalem. And Thomas, one of the disciples, actually says, oh, if you go there, I mean, it's a boiling point. You're on a collision course with the religious elite. Thomas actually says, I guess we should go with you, that we can die too. And I think he means it. Even as he is disclosing to go there means finally we're going to have this thing come to a head, but it's not what you think it is, and yet they still wrestle with their version of what a Messiah is and Jesus' version of what a Messiah is. Okay, on the way down, they pass through this region called Caesarea Philippi. And this is a famous town. It's got a big altar there to Caesar Augustus. And it's in this place. Now, Jesus had this way of kind of coming into a metropolis and staying in the villages outside the metropolis. It's part of his strategy. It was almost like he was a small town influence that was avoiding this collision course with the big superpowers. And you might expect that if Jesus was to come here today, he'd go right into Washington, D.C. and do a rally on the mall. And that wasn't his style. He'd be out in beautiful suburbs, maybe like Brambleton, Virginia, where his people are. That was way funnier than you're giving me credit for. So here he is in the suburbs outside of Caesarea Philippi, and this is where he says this. Okay, here we go. Matthew 16, verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples. It's more like the rural area than it is the suburbs, by the way, so some of you are like, yeah, country. Anyway, he said, who do people say the Son of Man is? Super important question. Who is Jesus? I mean, how do you understand him? Is he a great teacher? Is he a rabbi? What's going on? What do you believe about Jesus? At Terraforma, we hold this idea that if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. If you want to know what God wants from you, listen carefully to the words of Jesus. We want to do everything we can here to help you understand who Jesus is, what he taught. Not the Jesus of your imagination, the caricature in our culture that's sort of a mix of, positivity and uncontroversial, saccharine, sweet niceness. No, the Jesus of Scripture, the one who was controversial enough to get himself crucified because he was on a collision course with the religious institution and the temporal political powers of his day. This dissident revolutionary voice that called people to a different vision of what religion could be, what faith could be, who God is, and how you can encounter and experience that God. Who do people say that Jesus is? And they answer. Some say John the Baptist was a prophet that preceded Jesus who had just been killed. So people actually thought, this is ironically Jesus' cousin, and people thought, well, maybe now that John the Baptist is dead, you're like John the Baptist again? Not sure how that works, but anyway. Others say Elijah, this prophet, he's back. And this is messianic hope that when Elijah reappeared, famously Elijah doesn't die. He gets caught up to heaven on a tornado. Okay? And they thought, well, he's going to come back and precede the coming of God's kingdom on earth, the restoration of David's throne. And still others, Jeremiah, are one of the prophets. And Jesus asks a very important question. He says, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter, quick to speak, slow to listen, he says, you're the Messiah. You're the anointed one, the Son of the living God. You are the warrior king who's come to deliver us. Man, he nails it. And yet I suspect he doesn't understand anything about what he's just said. I mean, he hits it on the head. He hits it perfect. Now, this is written in hindsight. The gospel accounts are written after the reality of the resurrection has caused them to re-examine every single thing that Jesus ever did and said. And I love the way that it honestly wrestles with the boneheadedness and the buffoonery of the disciples. It isn't like these were the most enlightened model citizens. Their dawn of understanding crept slowly over the horizon. These are not the smartest dudes in the world. They actually had been flunked out of Hebrew school and been passed up. They were in their father's trade for the most part, and Jesus called them, these unlikely people, to follow him and enter apprenticeship in the way of this new rabbi. And this is part of this. Okay, in one breath, he gets it. He nails it. You're the Messiah. I know who you are. I see the reality of you are. And this is what Jesus says. Hey, you got it. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that your name is Peter. And on this rock, I'm going to build my church. It's a little play on words. That word Petros means rock. On this rock, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I'm going to give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Who can talk like this? Who has the authority to say, we're going to do something together. I'm going to build a movement that's going to upend all the structures of this world, and you're going to be a key-carrying, authority-wielding magistrate and an ambassador for the kingdom of God, where everything is done on earth as it is in heaven, and I'm going to hand you those keys. Who can give keys out but the one who presides over everything? I mean, Jesus is claiming to be the Lord of all history. He's claiming to have the authority to bestow it upon another. This is a wild claim if it's false. This is the kind of thing that if this is true, you can't believe about Jesus that he's just a good moral teacher because he's insane if this is wrong. You actually would go, listen, I mean, here, I love you. If you're here, come to Terraform. I love it. Come back, please. We love it. I think it's great. Okay. If at any point I claim to actually be like, hey guys, by the way, like I had an encounter with UFOs. I now have the secret wisdom. Like join my cult, drink the Kool-Aid, or whatever. I stop being a good presence in your life. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a line between helpful and toxic, and I've just crossed that line when I start asking people to worship me. Jesus is doing that, which is beautiful and amazing. Like jaw hit the floor, unreal, if it's true. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This is rabbinical language for like, you guys are going to be able to set the culture of the movement going forward. And then he ordered his disciples, I'm telling you when he was the Messiah, keep the secret. Why? Because his time isn't quite come yet. We've got to get to Jerusalem. We've got a lot of things going on. It's a little early in the story. And then, Jesus wants them to understand it. Okay, you've recognized my authority. You've recognized I am God in the flesh. I am your long-awaited delivering king. I am the warrior who's going to lead the revolution. You're right, but you're wrong. And I want to make sure you get where you're wrong. Listen to how Jesus explains this is what this means to Jesus. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things. I don't like that. You know what we like? Winners. That's what we like. We like it so much. I was at a Super Bowl party with a friend of mine once. His name was Dave. And Dave came complete head to toe, down to the socks in one team's apparel. And that team was losing by an, unattainable margin by halftime. And he disappeared. Dave disappeared. And he came back, completely other team, head to toe. He had switched allegiance at halftime. And we were like, Dave, like, what the heck, man? And I said, you were just in the other team's stuff. And this is what he said. That's your opinion. no, it's not, Dave. Like, you just switched. And he was like, no, I didn't. Always been a Rams fan for life. We're like, Dave, you can't expect us to believe. I mean, and you want to have pictures? And this is like in the wild 90s before cell phones. I wish, because it would have been really convenient. That's your opinion. We like winners. We don't want what do you mean suffer? I'm going to suffer many things at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day raised to life. I need you to understand this. This only made sense in hindsight. They weren't expecting the resurrection. They didn't get this because their idea of who Jesus should be prevented them from seeing who Jesus was and what it meant for them. And this is your danger too. The danger is you have conflated on some level, and guys, this is, I think, one of the greatest crises of our time. I think one of the greatest threats to the work of Jesus in the world is this rising confusion about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And it's being paraded about in our culture right now under a banner, and I want to tell you, I'm just going to name it. This is not a political statement, but I'm just going to name it. They call it Christian nationalism. This idea of like, hey, God's plan is going to flow through this country. Okay, I need you to imagine this. Imagine now with me these people walking the Greco-Roman world in the first century, carrying this revolutionary message of selfless love into the Roman Empire, and them getting around and going, you know what the Lord needs? The Lord needs a new Nero. God's got a new Caesar for us. They didn't care. Their allegiance was to a kingdom that wasn't of this world, and so the affairs of the political sphere in Rome were not consequential to them. And here we are, we're like obsessed. I mean, it's like, okay, but wait a second, I got to do this thing. What if our allegiance to empire is preventing us from seeing the king that offers us everything? On his way to Jerusalem, Jesus stops, and there's this spot between Bethpage and Bethany, and you can Google images this and find this spot. And it gives you a view of the entire Kidron Valley. You can stand there and look at the city of Jerusalem, and it sort of survey the whole entire valley there. You can see Bethlehem down there, and then Jerusalem up here. I mean, this is a beautiful kind of vista. It's the same exact spot where King David, on his way 1,000 years earlier, fled the city because his son tried to steal his throne. And he gets up and he surveys the carnage below and he weeps. Now Jesus, prophetically coming the other direction, coming to the city, stops in the same spot where David wept, and Jesus also weeps. And this is what he said. He doesn't say, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I'm coming to conquer you. This is what he says. He says, Jerusalem, I weep for you. If only you knew what would bring you peace. If only you knew, if only you could hear it. And they can't. Now, again, Jesus spoke it. It would be mysterious. Because Jesus says in that moment, his disciples hear him say it, because a day is coming when siege works will be lifted against you and you will fall. Now, in AD 70, this happens. These people trying to figure out what does it look like to be in empire, and they have this framework of like violent resistance. And here's Jesus saying there's a way of love that doesn't do the violent resistance. This whole thing, we have in our culture this idea of like power and authority and violence and domination. And Jesus says, if you want to go that route, this is the route humanity has gone forever. It will end in your violent destruction. And that very thing happens in AD 70. Finally, the Romans are tired of insurrections that happen in Jerusalem, and they raze the city and they destroy it, and it's never been the same since. And Jesus is going, guys, if you could just get it, this is what will bring you peace. Now, what are you talking about? He's talking about a different vision of a way to be human. There's something else besides the race for power and prominence. There's something else. There's a different relationship with empire, except for this attitude that says, when I get to the top, if I can only get my tribe in power, then I will have the power, authority, and influence. And then, therefore, if my tribe has the power, authority, and influence, then I'll finally have peace. This is the lie. We tell ourselves this lie, and man, we get caught in it so often. For the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, there was just a constant strife and struggle all throughout the 1500s and 1600s. I mean, it's just this chaotic time in European history. And you have like Catholics in power for a little while and Protestants in power for a little while. And again, you would think that if you're a Protestant and the Catholics are in power and you've been oppressed and marginalized and you've just been harangued, it's like, oh, this terrible thing. You think, the story you told yourself is, if just the Protestants can get a foothold, then we'll finally be in power and then we can make the world a just and merciful and loving place. And what happened? Over and over again, when the Protestants got in power, they became the oppressors and they did the same exact thing the Catholics had done before. And then the Catholics are like, oh, we need to get somebody, when we get a king that's Catholic, it'll change, it'll be a better world. And the Catholics get in power and they forget again what it was like to be the oppressed, and they become the oppressors, and violence rules all over again. And the cycle keeps repeating. Over and over again we go. Jesus says, I'm the Messiah, and what it means to be the Messiah is to suffer and die. What? How does this work? And Peter took him aside. I love this. I love this. I love when we know better than Jesus knows about what Jesus needs to do. He's like, I think that's a bad way to be a Messiah. Jesus, you know nothing. He goes, you can't die. Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you. What I'm hoping you understand here is, if you know the story, they do get to Jerusalem. Jesus is arrested. He's tried at night in this kind of kangaroo court of the high priest and his family kind of try him in the middle of the night, and they abuse him like you cannot believe, and his disciples all kind of scatter. But when he's arrested, okay, because Judas comes and betrays him with a kiss in that garden, when he's arrested in this olive grove outside of the city, his disciples all of a sudden pull out weapons. Like, why are these guys armed? They're following Jesus. That's just it. They still thought up until that moment in time, this is going to be the shot heard around the world. This is going to be the first blood draw in the revolution. The battle begins right now. They're coming to arrest Jesus, draws a sword, goes, you won't arrest him! And he goes in, and Peter's not very good. He was a fisherman.